Formula 4 versus rental karting. Today I'll be sharing my experience of driving both and highlighting the key differences. Firstly, the brake pedal in an F4 car is extremely stiff and it barely moves. Now, brake pressure is measured in bars, and this is important because lap time in F4 is won under braking. The key is to brake as late as possible and as hard as possible. For example, at turn 1, on my first few laps, I braked at 100 meters and hitting the brakes at 70 bars of pressure. My engineer told me that the top drivers were braking at 75 meters and hitting 90 bars of brake pressure. So you can imagine, across the course of a lap, I was losing tenths of a second to the top drivers in every braking point. So gradually, I had to learn to brake much harder and later. On the other hand, in a rental kart, you can't just smash the brake pedal. If you try this technique, you'll lock the rear tires and go off spinning into the barriers. And this brings me on to my second point, which is about throttle application. In an F4 car, you can't just apply the throttle 100% instantly. Otherwise, you'll get a lot of wheel spin and you'll lose the rear end. Rather, you must control the throttle as shown in this graph, where you'd feather the throttle briefly on exit of the corner, and as the car grips, then you can put your foot down to the floor. It's all about finding the sweet spot. In a rental kart, however, you're trying to keep the revs high, so you can get away with being a bit more aggressive on the accelerator. And this brings me on to my third point, which is about the transmission. An F4 Gen 1 car is manual with a clutch next to the brake and shifter paddles on the steering wheel. Each corner has a specific gear which you need to take it in. This depends on how much speed you're able to carry and your feeling of the car. Initially, it takes a few laps to memorize the gears for each corner, but the more practice you do, the easier it gets. In rental karts, it's an automatic transmission, and as I mentioned previously, the key is to keep your revs high. The fourth difference is the physicality. In an F4 car, you're wearing fireproof undergarments, which makes you very hot and sweaty. On top of that, you're pulling a lot of G-forces through the corners, and the G-forces are especially felt on your neck. Also, braking can be a challenge on your left leg, because each braking point requires a lot of brake pressure. The key is to brace yourself before hitting the brake pedal. In rental karts, the physicality is obviously a lot less. However, you should use your body to lean when cornering, as this will give you an advantage. Now, the final difference is obviously the cost. I was fortunate to be sponsored for this experience in F4. I raced in F4 just before the pandemic. However, I lost that sponsor ever since. The cost to race in a full F4 season starts from $300,000. In saying that, F4 is actually one of the cheapest single-seater categories compared to Formula 3 and Formula 2, where the fees are a lot higher. In contrast, if you want to do a full season in a rental kart competition, such as the Saudi World Series, you'd be paying $100 per round. But remember, F4 and rental karting are on completely different levels. However, the basics you learn in rental karting about racecraft will always stay with you. If you'd like to see a video on how to get into karting and the progression, be sure to let me know. And if you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comments.